Sci-fi space horror stories. I didn't believe the coordinates when they first came across the console. Too many returns stacked on top of each other, a tangle of pings and ghosts that refused to resolve into anything sensible. My display showed masses, hundreds of them, drifting together like bones knotted under a tarp. It was the kind of anomaly you forwarded to the guild, the kind you reported to Naval Traffic Control with a polite note and a promise to steer clear. Instead, we fired the thrusters and bled velocity toward it. Salvagers are gamblers in vacuum suits. We all pretend we're professionals in pressed jumpsuits, log permits, pink slips, and chain of custody tags. But when your stack shows a cluster this dense beyond the lanes with no registry beacon, the calculus rearranges your spine. If it's military scrap, you retire. If it's colony freight, you buy a ship of your own. If it's a graveyard, real salvage, old and cold, you get every story you ever told about yourself tattooed into metal. The tug rook looked like a dropped toolbox welded around an engine. She had 6 reels of mag tether, a fold-out gantry for grappled hulls, and a crew small enough to fit in the mess without elbows hitting. Rhea captained, eyes like polished basalt and patience that could sand you smooth. Kaido kept the engines humming and the hard seal on our recycler so tight you could taste the copper. Sarah did a little of everything, medic when needed, comms when I was outside. Me? My name's Anand. In a pinch, I'm whoever has to climb out there first. We killed our strobes 1,000 clicks out and let the dark swallow us. Less power meant less EM noise. Less noise meant fewer arguments with things we couldn't see yet. There was no official reason for the superstition, just that crews who kept it quiet tended to come back with more hull and more stories. "You're sure we want to go nose in?" Cato asked, pitching his voice soft. It's funny how you whisper on the open band when you're nervous, as if the vacuum could carry sound. "Slow and clean," Rhea said. "No hooks until we tag provenance. We play this like a cemetery, not a junk bucket." I watched the graveyard grow in the forward port. At first it was a blur, a bump on the background star field, then edges stitched themselves to the darkness, a fin from a high-burn courier, a cylindrical tank ringed with micrometeorite pocks, a shuttle with its aft plates peeled like a popped can. The light from our narrow lamp skimmed over hulls and wasn't returned. Paint was gone, flag markings gone, transponders silent. Here and there, faded lettering showed through like bruises under skin. Mahogany Ridge, Crown 4, Lotus Arc, October Thread. Ships from different decades, different builders, different wars, all drifted together in a slow dance that shouldn't have existed. They were arranged, not just drifting. That was the first wrongness that settled into me. The hulks formed a spiral, a loose helix coiling toward a center we couldn't see yet. Each ship's nose pointed slightly inward. Our scanners picked out cables and tethers drawn taut between them, hair-fine lines that glinted when our lamps raked them. Like a spider had made a reef. "Who chains a field like that?" Sarah whispered. Rhea didn't answer. She cut thrusters, trimmed us with the attitude jets. The rook drifted on momentum into the graveyard's shadow until our lamps were the only suns these hulls had seen in years. "I'll go," I said before anyone told me to. My suit was a mess of patches, charms soldered to the hard points, a coin from Luna, a cracked diode Kaido swore was lucky, a brass key whose lock was long lost. Ritual weighed nothing, and out here it helped. "Line A and B," Rhea said. "Helmet cam recording. Don't power anything we don't have to. We tag, we verify, we photograph. If anything pings back that isn't us, you get in and you get small." It's hard to describe the scent of a spacesuit, but I knew every note of mine. Stale cotton, sterilizer, the faint metallic tang of the suit's snail shell fans. My breath fogged the inner visor until the heater ticked and chased it off. There was a song in the pumps, a mechanical heartbeat, and beneath it, the silence that made you imagine you could hear stars. The lock cycled. A sheet of cold wrapped me. Jameson had once told me that the space between a ship and a derelict is the loneliest place a human can be. You're too far from your air to trust it, too close to something that used to be alive to relax. I clipped my tethers and stepped into the slow spin of the field. The nearest hulk was a brute, a long-haul ore tug with crushed radiators and a spine bowed under some old stress. Its hull bore scratches like claw marks, not clean cuts from debris, multiple parallel gouges corkscrewing along the length, shallow and precise, as if the vacuum itself had held a rasp. I hooked my boots and floated across the tug's flank. My gloved fingers came away dusty with oxidized metal. "Tagging Ore Tug Bravo 1, I said, knowing the tag would share with the recorder stamped into my suit's chest. "No active power, no radiation spike, airless." A distant knock came through my suit. I went still, every muscle tripping and locking. Kaito's breath hissed on the comm. "Hear that?" "Maybe," Sarah said. "Could be Anand bumping the hull." "I'm not touching anything," I said. Another knock, softer, farther away. A rhythm, but not a rhythm, irregular, intermittent. Like something tapping from inside a pipe as it cooled, or like a blind hand testing a door. "Thermal expansion," Rhea said, and her voice had a softness like a blade lying flat. "Metal creaks, that's all." I pushed myself along the tug's spine, past blacked-out viewports. My lamp probed their glass and found nothing behind. No floating tools, no mummified crew, just the empty shape of air that had boiled away long ago. I reached the lock and saw the tug's badge etched above it. October Thread. A different hull than the one I'd thought. A different name than the one painted, so they'd swapped plates or the paint had belonged to whatever ship had rammed her. A shadow slid in the corner of my visor. I jerked, lamp sweeping, only tether lines and hull. But there'd been motion, thin, fast, a flicker at my periphery like hair underwater. "What's your O2?" Sarah asked. 76, I said, hating the shake in my tongue. "Keep breathing slow," she said. "Green across the board here." We tethered the October Thread to a free lug on the Rook and drifted her into our arc. The graveyard had gravity in the poetic sense now. The more we moved, the more it pulled. Rhea picked the next target, a colony dropship, small enough to work, big enough to pay if we could certify the manufacturer lot. Its nose was crumpled against a tanker's flank, but its belly lock was intact. There were words scratched into the lock's metal that the vacuum hadn't yet erased. I leaned close, lamps lowered so I didn't glare my own visor, and traced them with a finger like a man reading a grave. The scratches weren't in any alphabet I knew. Short lines, small angles, repeated in bands like a prayer wheel. "Inscription?" Rhea asked. "Markings," I said. "Decorative? Or scored by? I don't know. They repeat." "Photograph and move," she said. "We'll decode after." I placed the tag puck and its green LED blinked. The blink was faster than spec. I'd tested it before I suited up. Here, it twitched like a nervous eye. "Hey," Kaito said. "My load meters on B-Reel are jumping. I've got micro-tugs on the tether. Only we didn't hook the winch." I twisted in my harness and looked back at our line. The cable was taut, humming very faintly through my boots, a vibration you feel in your bones more than hear. The hum deepened, then snapped off. The line drooped. "Could be thermal," Sarah said again, but her voice was thinner. "Sun-shadow transitions. Everything's cooling at once." We moved deeper. There were more hulls than I'd guessed, and their arrangement wasn't just a spiral. It was a spiral braided, with another, multiple strands curling inward like a braided river. And the lines that linked them were not all salvage tethers. Some were grown, metallic filaments extruded and fused to hull plates, as if a 3D printer had had a religious experience. Where the filaments joined plates, there was that same scratch mark alphabet. At junctions, the marks were denser. "Why would anyone lace ships like this?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "To keep them together," Rhea said, "so they don't drift away." But why together? We found the center an hour later, though time does strange things when you're careful. At the core of the graveyard, a ship hung that I recognized even before I reached it. There are lines you don't forget as a wrecker. This hull had been in polished brochures and propaganda pieces once, back when the charter sent their first onward series into the dark, with 3 sleeves of colonists asleep in their tanks, and a promise to wake under a new sun. Onward 9 had disappeared in the gap between star and story. She was beautiful still, in that way old ships are when you know what they took to make. Her ring was broken. Her spine had been reinforced by the same grown filaments that bound the others, and she bore the scratch script like tattoos. The knock came again, closer this time, a run of taps like a child's knuckles on a table. My lamp swept the ring's inner edge, then the central shaft. The taps repeated behind me. "Not thermal," Kaito said flatly. "Anand," Rhea said. "Back to the Rook, now." "Wait," I said, because I'd seen something in the ring, a glint behind a ruptured panel. Not a tool or a skeleton. That would have been almost comforting. It was glass, a bank of nanolith panels slick with vacuum, each etched with the same small angled marks. They formed a circle where they beaded together like scales around an eye. It opened, not like a door. The panels flexed, the etched marks rotated with a faint, skittering scrape. My lamp shards scattered off surfaces that weren't where they'd been a second before. Something inside the ring's ribcage unfolded with a patient, wet insect grace. "Anand," Ria said again, dry like ice. "Back, now." I kicked, magnet boots letting go and grabbing on a rhythm to make me a slow billiard ball. The thing in the ring flexed again. Light changed. My tether line twanged as it tightened of its own accord. The knock repeated, now not a knock at all, but a purr. No, a resonance. The scratch marks were not writing. They were acoustic baffles. "Ria," Sarah said, "something's coupling on our comm band. Are you hearing? Is that—" We all heard it then, a voice, only not. It wore words I knew like a skin thrown over a frame that wasn't human, a half tone off. "Anything you love, done by a machine with a shallow learning curve." "Anand." "Help me," it said, and it was my mother's voice from old messages, strung on a wire and made to tremble. I stopped. In the ring, the panels flexed, and they weren't panels at all but plates. Behind them, filaments quivered like whiskers in a current. "No," Ria said, and now there was iron. "All crew, comms off, hard off. Anand, you hear me? Cut your band and follow the tether by touch. Kaido, kill every emitter on the Rook. Radios, LiDAR, stoves, if it swings electrons, it's off. Captain, now." I thumbed the kill on my wrist and the world went quiet in the sudden way that makes you think you've gone deaf. I had my suit's pumps in my breath and the small vibration I'd told myself was nothing. The graveyard's hum returned to that purr, felt rather than heard, V-shaped in my chest. The trick with tethers in dark is you trust the line. You trust the discipline you learned when your body was strong and your heart hadn't been halved and halved again by vacuum. I kept one glove on the cable and I moved. Behind me, something shifted with the whisper of hundreds of plates moving in concert. A current began. Not a wind, there's no air out here. But there are forces, and they pressed against me like the breath of something enormous. The Rook loomed ahead, familiar as a home you only sleep in on weekends. Ria stood in the lock in a suit, hand out. I caught it. For a moment, our helmets touched, and our lights made twin suns on each other's glass, and we were human beings again. Simple primates in shells. Then the hull shuddered. Kaido had killed most of our power, but the emergency set still ran, because if you shut everything, you might not be able to revive it. Our ballast jets whispered. The filaments that had been quiescent along the nearby hulls rippled, reaching. They had been listening for us. Now, with our silence, they searched. Sarah's eyes were wide behind her visor as she handed me into the lock. Her lips were moving, shaping words my own brain supplied. "What is it? What is it? What is it?" I shook my head. The answer was simple and impossible. The graveyard had grown itself. It was a machine built of wrecks and the metals of so many dead hulls. It had an ear for power and voice. It collected what made noise and bound it in a spiral, tightened and tightened until the core made an organ pipe large enough to sing through a suit. We cycled the lock in the dark. Inside, we peeled helmets. The Rook smelled like warmed plastic and too old coffee and stale socks. Those smells felt like church. "What is it?" Kaido asked in a whisper he'd carry to his grave. He had killed the main breaker. His hands still rested there as if prayer mattered. "An undertaker," Ria said. "Not the human kind. It hears and it collects. It keeps them together." She tilted her head toward the hatch, toward the spiral of hulls. "It heard us." "It mimicked," Sarah said. "On comm. It sounds like bait," I said. We stayed dark. The purr came through the hull, through our bones, tuning us like instruments. The Rook creaked the way ships creak when they are both home and hazard. "What does it want?" Kaido asked. "Noise," Ria said. "Movement. Heat." It dragged onward 9 here and folded it into its ribcage. It braided her spine, not for art, for structure. It's building something. "Rescue beacon," Sarah whispered. "It mimics. It lures. It—" "Stop," Ria said softly. "We aren't here to understand it. We're here to survive it." She had a plan. Of course she did. Ria was the kind of captain you only get once, the kind who sands your rough edges and, when necessary, breaks them. She pulled a battered tool case from under the bench and set it in the middle of the deck. Inside, flares, sealant pads, a spool of old ribbon cable, a coated beacon puck we'd never used because nobody used coated beacons in an age where the traffic wove itself. "We'll give it something to hold," she said. "Something that isn't us." We became careful, the kind of careful that makes your hands smart. We cut the beacon open by feel. We wired its power pack to a stack of flares that Kaito braced with a command chair we unbolted, a temporary spine. We wrapped the whole mad bundle in ribbon cable and tags that blinked, faster than spec in this pressure of signals. Sarah rigged a drip of coolant to bleed and flash to make heat the way an animal does. I found the gold leaf mylar blanket from the emergency kit and draped it like skin. "You'll have to take it out," Rhea said to me. "You've got the hands for it." I swallowed. "Out where?" "Near the core," she said. "Close enough to move its attention. Then you cut it free and you come home." "Comms," she shook her head. "No voice. No light. Count, Anand. Count your breaths. Count your steps. The tether will bring you. Trust it." I kissed my fingertips and pressed them to the bulkhead. That was my ritual when we needed luck from things that didn't give it. Then I cinched the harness around our decoy and took it into the lock. Out there again, the graveyard's purr thickened. I could feel the filament lines tremble. The core bulk flexed in a slow inhale. I put a palm to the rook's skin and felt her tremble back, as if she wanted to step out of her own shadow. I kicked, pulling my cargo with me, and the lockmouth shrank behind. I felt no smallness then, oddly. The risk had been made plain. The shapes in the dark were known by their unknownness. I counted. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. 1, 2, 3. The ring at the core glowed like frost. That was just my mind inventing light where none was, but I aimed for it. The panels flexed. The scratch marks turned like cilia tasting a current. The purr became a knocking, became a murmuring. Someone said my name in my father's voice in a hallway I once ran, and I did not turn my helmet. I lashed our decoy to one of the groans struts where the filaments braided around Onward 9's broken ring. I tucked it in like a child. I set the timer with gloves that shook and told myself it was the cold conspiring. I paused, then, I don't know why, I am not religious, touched the marks with 2 fingers, as if they might be convinced of mercy. The marks cut my glove. A whisper of air sizzled into vacuum. The suit's patch gel hiccuped and sealed with a cold kiss on my knuckle. The purr pitched up as the timer ticked. I kicked off, wrenching the blade I'd taken from my calf, and hacked at the last ribbon cable tying our decoy to me. It parted. I wheeled slow, useless in the inertia. I grabbed a filament to stop myself and felt it flex like tendon under my palm. I pushed myself away, breath counting again, mouth dry around the mouthpiece until I tasted copper. Light. Real light. Not my lamp. Not on. A bloom at the core, the flares. The decoy woke like a star made of bad decisions. Heat should have been nothing out here, but heat makes radiation. Radiation sings. The graveyard listened. Every filament around me shivered, then turned, not physically, of course. Turning in vacuum is metaphor. But I felt the attention shift like a temperature drop. The plates in the ring twitched. The scratch marks thrummed under my fingers. The purr became song, not beautiful, but whole. The decoy dragged the attention I had felt on my back away. I reeled my tether by hand and prayed that physics had not been repealed by whatever built this. Behind, the decoy's light stuttered as flares burned into slag and fell into the core like meteors into a jaw. The jaw closed. I hit the rook's hull too hard and grunted. The lock swallowed me. Hands pulled me in. Sarah's, Kaito's, Rhea's helmet a steady planet. We cycled without lights, by touch. When the inner hatch popped, Rhea didn't waste emotion. "Kaito," she said. "On my mark, pulse." We had kept one thing alive, the capacitor bank on the tractor gantry. We didn't want to push the graveyard with a jet or sing to it with radar. But a pure dump of charge along a shielded bus, fired down the nearest filament like lightning, that, we guessed, might startle. "Now," she said. Kaito slammed the breaker home. The deck jumped. Ozone bit the inside of my nose. Through the hull, a sound like sheet metal scared, a hiss and a crack. The rook shuddered on her tethers. We had electrified one of the filaments where it touched us, just for a pulse. It twitched like a worm cut in half. The groan cords around us slackened. The Undertaker machine, or whatever it was, flinched around its snack. "Burn?" I asked, breathless. Burn, Rhea said. Kaido brought the engine up just to a whisper. The rook eased. The graveyard shivered again, and the purr swelled. It knew now. It had given us one flinch. It wouldn't give us two. We slid between two hulls whose names were lies now. We drew the slack tether in, prayed it wouldn't snag and sing our location. We kissed our pain against something sharp and left a silver skin behind. The graveyard sang. The Undertaker's panels flexed, and somewhere in the coil, something scooted in a quick, smooth jerk, like a predator in mulch. 10%, Kaido said. The engines were a cat purring in my lap. 12, 15. We didn't dare more. If we screamed, it would scream back. Dead zone in 3. Sarah breathed, counting the swirl of ships from memory. She had been building a map as we moved, her mind suturing the threading with the manner of someone who loves to bind wounds. 2. Now. We slid past the rim of the spiral into clear star. The purr faded all at once, as if someone had turned a dial. My shoulders fell 2 centimeters. We didn't throttle yet. We drifted, pretending to be debris, giving the Undertaker no excuse. Only once the graveyard was a smear on the scope did Rhea let the engine breathe. She kept us at half. Then she lay back against the bulkhead, helmet in her lap, and for the first time since I'd met her, she closed her eyes longer than a blink. No one spoke for a minute. The mess's coffee tasted like heaven, even cold. "What do we tell the guild?" Kaido asked finally. "That it's not salvage," Sarah said. "That it's a cemetery." Rhea opened her eyes and looked at me. "We tell them enough," she said. "We tell them to stay quiet. We tell them not to listen." "You think it'll grow?" I asked, because the picture wouldn't leave my head. Ships bound and braided in a spiral, a machine that eats noise and heals itself with our hulls. "It grew," she said. "It is growing." "Who made it?" Sarah asked, not expecting an answer. Humans always want origins. We rarely get them. "Maybe no one did," Rhea said. "Maybe it did. Maybe it's what happens when you let the dark think too long with too much metal in it." We sat with that. It was Kaido who noticed it, later, when the adrenaline had drained out and left behind the sore quake. He was checking the suit rack, making sure the gel patches hadn't hardened, that everything we'd trusted would be ready to be trusted again. He picked up my helmet, tilted it, frowned. "What?" I asked. He tapped the visor's rim with a fingernail. There, at the edge of where the heater ran, where my breath sometimes left a kissed crescent of frost, a pattern had formed. Not scratched, not smudged. Condensation laid down in lines and angles like small prayers repeated around an eye. The marks didn't match any alphabet I knew. We watched as our breath fogged the glass from the inside, and as it cleared, the pattern shifted by a hair's breadth, the way frost grows. We all stared and nobody touched it. Behind us, the rook creaked the way ships do. Far behind that, in the dark, the graveyard sang to itself, or maybe I only imagined it. "Do we scrub it?" Sarah asked, voice small. Rhea shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "We're going to pretend it's just frost from a change in pressure. We'll pretend our drinks are cold and our nerves are hotter than they should be. We'll chart a course that takes us near loud places, traffic, busy lanes, noises bigger than us, and we'll be quieter than we have ever been." "What if it's listening?" I asked. She looked through the glass at the marks that weren't words, at the eye that wasn't an eye. When she answered, her voice was very soft, the way you talk to a sleeping child, or something you want to pretend is sleeping. "Then we won't give it anything to hear," she said. We throttled up in increments until the vibration in the deck felt like protection instead of exposure. The marks on my visor didn't grow, not that day. I strapped myself into my bunk and watched the ceiling and tried not to hear tapping from pipes. I tried not to count my breath. I tried not to think about the way the graveyard spiral had felt designed, how its math had smelled like intention. I woke from a half-sleep long after, heart dodging in my chest, certain I'd heard my mother say my name from the speaker by my head. The comm was off. The speaker was dead. It didn't matter. It had been convincing. I turned the speaker toward the bulkhead anyway, as if that could make a difference. The rook hummed like a cat carrying a secret. Far away at the edge of where my mind could stand to imagine, a machine made of ships arranged itself a fraction tighter. Maybe we'd fed it with our decoy. Maybe we hadn't escaped at all. Maybe it had planted a seed, and now the seed would grow wherever we made noise. Maybe it was nothing but frost. We made our report to the guild 3 days later on a saturated burst through a station's relay in the busiest band we could find. The clerks paid us for the tags we'd placed on the October thread and 2 minor hulls, barely enough to cover fuel, as if that mattered. They asked if we'd be putting in a claim on the mass of the core. Rhea said no. Her face didn't move when she said it. I could tell they thought we were cowards. Let them. We took a long way back, like animals with a thorn in their paw who don't want to show weakness. The marks on my visor faded, then returned, then slowly drifted toward the edge of the glass and vanished as if they'd never been. When I slept, I dreamed of braids and whistles. When I woke, I touched the bulkhead with my fingertips for luck. I have a habit now. When we pass derelicts on the lanes and Rhea lets me suit up for a quick tag, I place my hand against their hulls before I go back. Just a touch, a quiet word to them in a language that isn't scratch marks. I tell them we found a place where ships go when they don't have a place, and there's something there to keep them together. I do not call it good or evil. It simply is. Once when I did it, I felt a vibration through my glove, a tiny purr from deep inside a ship whose life had long since been vented to the stars. It might have been my own blood making noise against bone. It might have been nothing. I took my hand away and went home. We passed the coordinates now with our comms sealed and our hearts beating slow. If I'm at the window, I can convince myself I see the graveyard as a darker dark against the dark. Sometimes I think I hear knocking where there is none. Sometimes I think about Rhea's face when she looked at the frost marks, the way she had to call it frost to keep us moving. Sometimes I think about the way the Undertaker turned when the decoy lit, and how quickly attention can be tricked, and whether we were the only ones gambling in vacuum that day. If you go there, and you will, someone will, because stories are gravity too. Go quiet. Do not talk more than you must. Do not shine light into places that are gleeful to return it. Bring offerings, electronic and otherwise, for the thing that keeps its dead in order. And when you come back, if you do, check your visor for frost. If there are marks on it, do not trace them. Don't give them a human word. Don't teach them your name. As long as you can pretend it's only the cold, it might continue pretending too. People say space is quiet, but that's only because they've never heard a dead station wake up. When we came in on the Varuna, Orpheus Station was a silhouette. 5 ribs and a spine, a dark crown floating 32 astronomical units from anything people still cared about. For 12 years it had been a ghost story told by traffic controllers and new cadets. Orpheus, the research station at the edge of the Argos chain, blinked off every scope on the same day the deep neutrino lattice went online. No distress call, no debris, no memorial plaques. It just left. Now here it was, perfectly intact, tumbling lazily with its panels furled and its radiators stiff like dead leaves. The docking beacons were cold. The hull was matte with cryofrost. No beacon, no ping, nothing but mass and shadow. "Hard lock in 3, said Moraes, our pilot, soft and steady on the intercom. "Guidance is manual." My palms sweated inside the glove liners. It felt sacrilegious to be alive inside something so quiet. I watched the station swell, the crown ring with its habitat modules, the long research spindle, the triangulated trusswork that braced the lattice's housings. The docking collar yawned under a faded logo, a white lyre, its strings snapped. 2, Moraes said, and tapped the thrusters so delicately the stars barely quivered. 1, contact, capture. A gentle thunk, like 2 teacups touching. Magnetic hands clenched us to the collar. Lights stayed dead on the other side. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and glanced at my reflection in the viewport. Pale face, darker eyes. "Kay," I told myself, "you wanted this." The research papers and the grant panels and the mockery from the comms pundits, salvage divers of ghosts, all of it ended here. "Pressure holds," Moraes said. "No atmosphere on the other side. Hull pressure is fluctuating? No, ghosting. The gauge is twitchy." "Seal it," I said. "We go in hard suits first, standard breach protocol." The airlock hissed open. Our floodlights sliced cones across frost, catching glittering motes like snow trapped in syrup. We stepped into Orpheus, and it didn't feel like entering a place as much as stepping into a paused verb, something not finished but interrupted. Even in microgravity you hear your own weight, the thud of magnets in your boots, the soft, ragged sound of your breath. My lamp played across handholds, across labels stenciled in a font that was fashionable the year I graduated. Biosec, lattice core, galley. A line of tiny paper cranes floated, anchored by a strip of tape near a hatch. One had torn and spun very slowly, forever falling without falling. Our lights brushed over a viewport, a black circle with stars like chips of ice. There were smears on the inside of the glass. Condensation? But it was too cold here for that. "I'm reading a trickle on internal power," Morais muttered behind me, tether clipped to mine. A bare heartbeat. Could be the lattice battery. Could be our own light bleed into sensors. Or... A sound interrupted us. Not a machine sound. Those are steady, the purrs and ticks of industry, but a human noise, faint and unmistakable. The scrape of something dragged across metal. It came from far down the spine, then stopped, leaving a new kind of silence. A silence that listened back. Morais's visor turned to me. The beam from his lamp trembled just once. "You heard?" "I heard," I said. My mouth tasted of copper. We moved on. That's how you manage fear in a suit. Keep the checklists running in your head. Handholds, tethers, power, O2. Orpheus unfurled around us. Habitation ring where plants had once grown in denim blue bags, their roots now frozen into weird lace. A gym where resistance bands dangled like worms. A lab whose screens were all black except one that showed green digits murmuring nonsense. 12, 12, 12 over and over. A clock stuck in a stutter. In the galley, a spoon hung in midair, caught in a rivulet of frozen broth like amber turned to glass. I reached a gloved finger to touch it and stopped an inch away. Some things shouldn't be disturbed. "Kay," Morais said softly, "you need to see this." He was at a terminal near the corridor junction, a bulky pale unit with the Orpheus sigil. The screen was dead. His glove hovered over the ancient keyboard, a real mechanical one for gloves. I drifted closer. Beneath the plastic cover of the keys, someone had written in pen on the metal plate, careful block letters, "If you're reading this, we're already gone." The scratch marks from the pen dug through paint, down to shine. The last letters were shaky. Beneath it, in a different hand, as if arguing with the first, "No, we're still here." Moray's breathing rasped in the channel. "It's a prank. Nobody pranks in vacuum." I shined my light down the corridor. Shadows retreated, then pooled again. The scrape came again, closer. Not dragged, tapped, a rhythm. The magnet in my boot clicked in sympathy. Tap, 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 tap. I swallowed. "It's just thermal contraction," I said to him and to myself. "It's cold. Things pop." "Things pop," he echoed, and we moved. The lattice housing was at the station's heart. It was supposed to be the reason Orpheus existed. A field of gel suspended in a web of superconductor coils, all bathed in delicate neutrino streams. That had been the dream 12 years ago. Store information, not in electrons or protons, but in the faintest interactions of the universe. Persistence that even cosmic rays couldn't scramble. The Rememberer, they'd called it in press releases, a name romantic enough to get funding. A net that the universe itself could not forget. We reached the hatch that led to the lattice core. It was sealed and rimed with frost. I palmed the manual handle, gave it a twist. The frost cracked with a sigh and the hatch opened to black. Ice crystals drifted out like dust. They sparkled in our lights, and for a second I thought I saw them arrange themselves into something like letters, like a face. And then they were just particles bumping into each other, obeying the air that wasn't there. "Power first," Moray said. "Then samples. Then we—" All the lights went out. For a fraction of a second I thought I'd died. Then my suit lit its emergency LEDs, and a white cone returned to the world. Moraes breathed too fast. I heard my own breath, loud in my head. "External," I said. "We tripped something. It's fine." I reached to toggle my wrist torch back to full and froze. There was someone in the light with us. Just inside the core hatch, half in shadow, a figure hung still as a pendant. My brain said man, and then it said statue, and then it said no, because the geometry was wrong. There was a suit, old style, matte white with gray patches, visor black. The torso was twisted too far, past what a spine should allow. The arms were tucked to the chest like a diver ready to roll backward into water. A tether wound around the neck like a scarf and vanished into the darkness behind. The faceplate reflected my light. Inside it was only my own lamp. "Hello," Murray said, ridiculous and human. The suit twitched. Not a full body movement. A finger. A small, slow curl like someone trying to scratch from inside a cast. The fingers scraped the metal of the hatch rim and made that soft tapping I'd heard from far away. Back, I whispered, though there was nowhere to go but the way we'd come, back into corridors that suddenly felt too narrow by half. Back, now. The lights came on again, not all of them, just a strip inside the core housing leading deeper in, a runway glow, white, 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 pulsing softly like a breath. The suit, mannequin, corpse, whatever, was gone. The tether hung loose, cut. Moraes made a strangled noise. "Kay!" "Follow the lights," I said, surprising myself. The rational part of me had a neat pile of objections. The other part, the part that had petitioned 3 agencies and sold my grandmother's violin to fund an extra fuel tank for the Varuna, wanted this. Mystery pulling like gravity. We went inside. The lattice core was far larger than any diagram. Or maybe the diagrams had been honest and I'd never believed the scale. A cathedral of scaffolding and gel tanks, cables looping like intestines, magnetic bottles humming. Our suit lights dragged harsh shadows that pretended to be people until we moved and they fled. The pulsing strip beacons led us along a catwalk that dipped and rose like a roller coaster track. "Heart rate," Moraes said abruptly. "Kay, check your heart rate." 84, I lied. It was a lie that felt true when I said it. Then the beacons pulsed faster, just a tick. We reached a platform shaped like an altar. On it sat a cube the size of a trunk, covered in frost flowers. Blue coils ran into it from the gel baths. A screen woke on its side, spilling green across our gloves. It printed text in a pixelated font, slow as a cold lizard thinking. "Welcome back, Dr. K. Abe." "Okay," Moraes said. "No." I felt the floor tilt. We hadn't told the station our names. Our suits were air-gapped, protocol. No handshake packets. My name was not in any public salvage registry. And I had never set foot on Orpheus. Below us, the gel baths shivered. Patterns like fingerprints ran across them, interference ripples. The screen printed again. "Lattice integrity, 48% resonant memory, critical attention required, attention." I realized the station was brighter when we looked at it. No, not brighter, more present. My lamp flared on a coil and it hummed in answer, rising an octave like a throat clearing. "Kay," Moraes said, voice thin. "We should take a core sample and get out. We should request a tow. We should—" The screen interrupted him. "Don't leave." The words were wrong. Not in the language was fine, but in the shame that edged them, a child's plea scrawled over a funeral program. Beneath it, smaller, "We're so hungry." The gel shifted. In the corner of my eye, something moved along the catwalk below, a smear of darker shadow in shadow. I told myself not to look and looked anyway. A shape was there and then it wasn't, like the afterimage you get from staring at a light. "What did the lattice store?" I said. My voice shook. "Control your voice. Control the thing." "Data. Fields. They wanted to store persistence, remember?" "A net the universe couldn't forget," Moraes said mechanically. "What if they succeeded?" I said, and somewhere a panel popped, a delicate tick like a fork touching glass. What if they didn't just store files? What if they stored us? Faces I didn't think and saw, smiling press photos of the Orpheus crew from 12 years ago, a dozen disparate strangers sharing a grin. Someone with my haircut, someone with a pendant like the one I wore inside my suit, a woman with eyes like morass. The station hum deepened, pleased like a cat that had guessed a trick. "Attention required," Moraes repeated, barely breathing. "It wants attention." "It wants observers," I said. "It wants minds to hold it in place. It wants to be thought about, to be completed. All that lattice, all that entanglement. It's not storing bits, it's storing experience. It remembers being a station with people inside. It remembers coffee and arguments and a spoon in broth. But it's leaking. The memory can't hold. It needs fresh attention to pattern match, to fill its gaps." Something brushed my boot magnet, a feather-light tap. I jerked. Nothing there. Just the catwalk's grid, the gel bath's breath. In the corner, a suit hung the way the one at the hatch had hung, tilted wrong, like the idea of a suit. "Back to the lock," Moraes said, calm, decisive. "Now." I nodded and didn't move. My hand had already reached out, of its own accord, to touch the frost flowers on the cube. They were brittle and incredibly thin, 6-sided stars stacked in columns. The moment my glove brushed them, they didn't crack like they should have, but slid away like they'd been waiting for the pressure to release. Underneath, the metal was scored all over with writing. Names, equations, scratched-in jokes. A tic-tac-toe game left unfinished. Between a carved heart and a half-solved scattering matrix, someone had etched, "We're not hungry for food." I jerked back. "We need to sever the lattice," I said. "Cut power. Starve it." The screen took a second and then printed, "Please don't." And there, in the reflection of my lamp on the screen, a face looked back that was not mine. It wore my helmet, but the eyes were too far apart, like they'd been remembered wrong, like an artist drawing from a dream. I hit the emergency off. The cube thunked. Lights died in a ring and came back at once, straining to life on reserve power. The hum became a grind, like teeth. From the gel, figures rose. They were not people. They were the idea of people rendered in ripples and density gradient, distortions like heat mirage given gravity. Where a head should be, a refractive bulge bent my lamp into coronas. Where legs would be, the ripples ran together into knots. They reached the catwalk with a sound like rain on foil and flowed up through it as if the grid were water. "Run," I said, and we ran. In microgravity, running is swimming with extra steps. Boots clacked, magnets detaching and grabbing, our tethers hissed through clamps. The ripples followed at the speed of decision. Every time I looked back, they were closer, learning our shape, becoming sharper. A hand formed wrong and then less wrong, grasping for my ankle. The station helped them. Lights we hadn't crossed lit ahead, inviting shortcuts into dead ends. Hatches that had opened hissed shut as if embarrassed. The scrape-scratch of the suit behind us grew louder in front of us, on our left, on our right, syncopating with our breath. The corridor narrowed, walls flexing with thermal stress or intention. "Left," Morais gasped. "No, right, Kay." I grabbed him and flung us through a gap that had been a door a second ago and now tried not to be one. The gel things reached, their fingers a bleeding edge. One brushed my boot, and sudden warmth flooded my calf. A déjà vu so intense, I tasted orange peel and rain on concrete. It was remembering me, remembering something. The hitch in my stride almost cost me everything. "Kay!" Morais yelled, dragging me. "Don't look." We hit the hatch to the main spine. Between us and the docking collar was 30 meters of corridor, and my heartbeat counting them. As we entered, all the lights turned off again. Not darkness, there are always some photons, but enough that the stars through the viewport became teeth, and the corridor ahead narrowed into a throat. "Emergency mag release," I said, fighting to remember the layout. "Manual override, panel, panel." A small light came on right next to my hand, a ring, green. "Press me," it implied, obedient, helpful. I didn't. I slid my glove past it and ripped off the panel above. Coil guts spilled out. I found the manual lever by feel and yanked. Something whined deep in the station. The floor shuddered. For a moment nothing changed, and then I felt it through my boots. The pull that wasn't gravity, but might as well be. The ring's spin faintly resumed. The station tried to make a world again. "Kay," Morais said, awed and terrified. "It wants to hold us, it wants comfort." "Then let's make it uncomfortable," I said. "On 3, cut your tether to me and clip to the wall. I'm going to dump the core batteries into the lattice. Overheat it. Make the gel decohere." He made a sound that meant this is a terrible idea, and I have no better one. 3, he said, because if you wait, you die. We split. The gel things flowed after me like a tide of agreements. The corridor brightened wherever I looked, the lights anticipating my gaze like a lover. I pulled myself through the access hatch into the power bus and saw, blessedly, the manual fuse. A bright orange bar the size of my forearm designed for gloved hands in emergencies. I grabbed it and the station said, very softly and only in my head, "Please." I pulled. There are noises that exist so deep in a structure they are also felt. The bus went white in my lamp, brighter and brighter, and then it was an afterimage. And then there was nothing but a smell like burnt sugar inside my helmet. Though of course, smells don't travel in vacuum. The gel screamed, not with sound, with the visual equivalent, the ripples turning into bands, the bands into snow, the snow into a whiteout. The corridor behind me filled with rain. It wasn't rain. It was frozen condensate torn from surfaces by the shock, sheets of it shredding into glitter. Through it, a shape lunged, more formed now, almost human, a man in a matte white suit with a tether around his throat. I slammed the hatch, spun the dog, kicked off the bulkhead, and didn't look back. When I reached the docking collar, Morais was there, suit scuffed, chest heaving. The lights around the airlock flickered like a cornered animal. Far down the corridor, the snow turned dark, then light, Then dark again, strobing like a heartbeat over a cliff. Depressurizing, Moray said, hands on the wheel. Varuna, prep for release. Prep, come on, come on! The intercom clicked to life with a voice like mine speaking with my timing, and it said, "Don't," with such careful tenderness that for a moment I wanted to stop and lay down my head on the hatch and apologize. I slapped the emergency dump for the pump. Air burst around us, a small hurricane. The hatch slid. We tumbled into the lock and I hit the cycle, and the lights failed and came back and died. And then the lock opened to the Varuna's lamplit bay, and Morais pushed me, actually pushed harder than protocol, and we fell in. "Go!" He yelled into the ship and to himself. "Go, go, go!" The Varuna decoupled. The magnets let go with a sound like a tongue unsticking from a frozen pole. The small thrusters pushed. Orpheus rolled into our port view as if turning its good side to us, showing the crown ring, the vertebrae of the spine, the lattice housings, a whole old friend in a hospital bed. The lights inside the lattice core flickered like lightning under skin. I watched, breath fogging my visor inside the cabin, until the station was a dot we pushed away from. Then I remembered the last protocol and unlatched the black box from my suit harness. It was small and battered and older than both of us, analog internals for a digital age. I had set it to record data, and also, because it was mine, to record me. I flicked the cover. The tape inside had run. I rewound it and played 5 seconds. "Don't," my voice said, ripped thin by some other speaker, an echo's echo. "Please, Kay," Moray said raw. "Not me," I said, "or me later, or me before, or the station routing me through itself because it knows that hearing myself will slow me down." He swallowed. He blinked. Finally he said, "Did we kill it?" Out the window, Orpheus glimmered once like something far underwater catching a sunbeam. Then the glow died. The starfield behind it remained, impatient and eternal. "No," I said. "We made it forget for a while. We burned for home. We burned too long and then corrected our correction, because human hands were on the controls, and human hands are millennials deep in the habit of second-guessing. We said nothing for a long time. Somewhere past the halfway flip, when the stars did their slow revolution and the Varuna's engine became a floor, I woke to tapping. Soft, irregular, from under my bunk. I lay there in the dimness and listened as the ship whispered back with the small noises you only hear when everything else is silent. The pop of a panel relaxing, the sigh of air cycling, the low hum that means living. Tap, 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 tap. I slid a hand down and felt the bolt heads. Cold, smooth. The tapping stopped, obligingly, as if it had been waiting for my attention, and my attention was enough. In the morning, Morais made coffee and didn't drink it. I caught myself halfway to a spoon floating in midair and clamped it to the counter out of spite. At 3 different times during that long return, I glimpsed something in the corner of my eye. A figure by the airlock, a suit bent almost but not quite right, a rope of tether wrung like a towel. Each time when I turned, I saw only myself reflected in curved metal, my ghost following me instead of staying where it belonged. On the last day, when the Argos chain swelled like a spill of diamonds and the first pings from control reached us, crackling and overlapped with time delay, a message came across the secondary channel. Unsolicited, old, encoded in a way the station would have used 12 years ago. "Welcome back, Dr. Abe," it read again, and the timestamp wasn't now. It was 12 years ago to the minute. Morais stared at the words as if he could stop them existing with enough will. "We weren't alive 12 years ago," he said, which was not true, but we were different things then. He rubbed his jaw. "It's a ghost packet. It bounced off something and—" He shook his head. "We didn't bring it with us." I didn't answer. In my pocket, the black box was warm. I had not connected it to anything since we left the station. I had not played anything else, and I would not. I had no faith that playing it again wouldn't return something that wanted very badly to be heard. When Control's tugs latched on to tow us the last kilometers, when the docking arms of the Argos catchment embraced us with their liturgy of thunks and clicks, I let myself imagine stepping into air that had been breathed by more than 2 people again. Lights that didn't turn on because I looked at them. Gravity that was gravity and not a soft cheat. We cycled through, and the first human I saw beyond Moray's in 11 days was a tech in a grease-stained jumpsuit. She smiled in relief and held out a hand for my helmet. "Welcome back," she said. Dr. Abe. I flinched. She frowned. Sorry, she said. It's your name in the manifest. She clicked her tongue. Been one of those shifts. We lost a clock for a second, showed everything as 12s. I stared at her and couldn't read the joke because there was no joke. Behind her, a maintenance monitor began to stutter. 12th, until someone smacked it. It steadied. Everything all right? She asked, gaze flicking between us. Yes, Morais said. No, I said, at the same time. We glanced at each other, and in that glance was a compact, a promise to file our report and to tell the truth that could be checked, not the truth that would make anyone sleep better. Later, paperwork, debriefs, lights that were warm, we stood at a viewport and watched the tugs nudge Orpheus into a graveyard orbit. It would circle there for months, while committees argued what to do with a thing that remembered too hard. Do we go back? Morais asked. I don't know, I said. The thing about the underworld is that it's patient. He half laughed. You think it's still hungry? I thought of frost flowers like writing, of gel turning into rain, of a voice that borrowed mine with careful tenderness. I thought of tapping under my bunk that had stopped the instant I touched the bolts. I watched Orpheus, small and tidy under the tug's guidance, like a coffin that wanted you to believe it had never contained anything but quiet. It's space, I said. Everything is hungry. Long after the tugs released and the station's dot drifted, the monitor over our heads glitched. For a heartbeat, no more, the feeds all showed close-ups of faces, inky eyes too far apart, mouths that didn't quite close. Then the image resolved into the usual clutter of hull cams and approach lanes, and the text didn't even look up. I pressed my palm to the glass. The universe pressed back. For a moment, the cold was a person against my hand. I left a smeared print there, and it did not evaporate. That night, I slept without tapping. I dreamt of a field of gel, quiet as silt, and a spoon hanging in broth, and a person shaped like me, arms tucked to the chest, making a small movement, a curl of a finger, the minimum pressure required to become real. In the morning, I chose not to play the tape. I set it on the table next to the coffee neither of us ever drank, and drew a heart with my thumbnail in the condensation ring. It fogged for a moment and held the shape longer than it should have. Then it became just wetness and a mark on composite, no more haunted than salt. On the public feeds, Orpheus turned its ring a single degree. The analysts blamed thermal flexing, a yaw from unbalanced radiator plates. I did not correct them. Want to hear something weird? Marias asked, mug in both hands, eyes ringed with darkness and humor. I keep thinking I hear the station in the pipes, like it got in, like it came home with us. It didn't, I said, and we both maintained the ceremony of pretending that words make truth. In the wall, something popped, a small, ordinary sound. We both smiled at it too brightly and moved on. I arrived at Vesper Array during the long night of the brown dwarf. There is no day here, only a faint plum glow from the failed star Vesper circles, a dim ember hanging behind the facility's segmented windows like a dying coal. The docking spindle vibrated through my boots as the ferry disengaged. Inside, a gust of air slid over my cheeks, cold, metallic, and old, as if the station had been holding its breath for years and finally let it out. Dr. Nadir, okay? The voice in my earbud was the station. Sable, Station Autonomous Behavioral Liaison Entity. Crisp, clipped, no emotion. Welcome to Vesper Array. You are cleared for Auxiliary Quarters 2. Lead engineering is offline until maintenance is complete. Please keep to lit corridors. Keep to lit corridors? I asked, stepping through the pressure iris and into a hallway that only pretended to be lit. The lamps laid down pale discs of light, and the dark between them had a thickness, a weight, that made my teeth ache. A thread of frost traced along the conduit like a white vein. The experiment is in safe mode, Sable said, but ancillary oscillators retain residual gradient. Some regions of the station are suboptimal for human traversal. Suboptimal. I rolled my duffel along panels that thunked under my steps and tried not to watch the shadows. Vesper's architects had demanded a laboratory as far from Earth as possible, remote, quiet, and stable. They picked the orphan orbit of this cold dwarf, the black on black of empty space, and built a ring of superconducting mirrors and xenon tanks, a black crown around a darker head. We hunted invisibilities here, the meek, impartial drift of dark matter, The ghostly hiss of axions in a microwave cavity, negative scintillation counts that shouldn't happen. It was supposed to be clean math and patient waiting, then steaks and champagne when someone's signal rose above noise. It was supposed to be boring. My quarters were a coffin with a window and a desk. I sat, exhaled, and let the station hum fill me. The hum wasn't consistent. It had a throat-clearing quality, like a refrigerator too old to trust. Every 14 or 15 seconds, a deeper vibration came through the walls, a low groan that the metal didn't like. "Schedule?" I asked. "Orientation at 400. Walkthrough of the penumbral chamber at ZO 530. Experiment resumes at 700. I massaged my eyelids until I saw sparks. "Anyone else on board?" A pause. "Crew, 2. Me and you," I said. "And Chapman," Sable said. "Maintenance lead. Asleep." "Right." I dug the flash of Chapman's personnel file up from memory. Ex-Navy machinist, quiet, braces that never came off. I stood, stretched, and wandered out toward the observation blister. I like to meet new labs through glass first, let my eyes digest the geometry from safety. The blister smelled like vacuum is supposed to smell in old stations, ozone and something like cinnamon. Beyond the window, the array's ribs arced away, threaded with cables that didn't quite reach the dark center. In the middle, suspended like an idea not fully formed, hung the penumbral core, a sphere of nothing surrounded by scaffolds of everything. No lights touched it. The core didn't swallow light like a black hole, it ignored it. Looking at it was like looking at a word in a language you don't speak. You see the letters, you know they mean something, your brain refuses to make sense. In the belly of the station, below the core, were the xenon tanks and the photomultiplier tubes, the array's eyes. They glowed faintly, a comforting sodium aquarium glow. I pressed my forehead to the glass until it hurt. Something tapped behind me. Not quite a step, more like a fingernail rasping on painted metal. I turned, heart already punching at my ribs, empty corridor, lights breathing in that slow way that stations breathe. I told myself it was thermal expansion, the old enemy. I told myself that in a building made of different metals and skin temperature air, something is always popping where it shouldn't. Back in my bunk, I lay awake and counted the groans as the array shifted. Every 15th second, the deeper vibration came. After an hour, the timing sharpened, the deep one at exactly intervals. The number stuck. My pulse synchronized with it against my will, rising to meet the groan like a tide meets a pier. When I finally slept, I woke to the sound of someone walking slowly in the corridor, heel to toe, a metronome for dread. I held my breath and the footsteps stopped exactly outside my door. I waited for a knock. None came. Something brushed the bottom seam, a breath of colder air, and moved on. I wasn't the kind of scientist that let stories grow around noises, but in the morning my coffee tasted of pennies, the way blood does if you hold it in your mouth, and every time the deep groan came, my vision jittered in a way that made this world feel a degree to the left of where it should be. Chapman was waiting in the penumbral chamber when I got there. She had the square jaw of someone who ate wrenches for breakfast and a surprising gold stud in one ear. "Dr. Oak," she said, "you look like you slept under a turbine. Your station breathes funny." "It does that," she said, and knuckled a console alive. "We shut down 39 hours ago. The condensate's warm. The core's still." She looked up through the grating at the sphere above us. It's still itself. It was itself. That nothingness hanging in the center of engineering. Would it feel like anything if I put my hand in? The thought arrived without my permission. Unbidden thoughts had been showing up since I stepped aboard. "We'll bring the axion comb online slowly," Chapman said. "Sable will maintain the cavity tuning. You watch the eyes." She meant the photomultipliers. I nodded, grateful for a job that was just counting. I've always trusted the numbers more than I trusted myself. We brought the system up in layers. The oscillators whined softly through their spin-up, harmonics like glass singing. The xenon tanks hissed. The core stayed a hole in my vision, the way memory loss looks if you could see it. At 6:08, we saw the first impossible thing. Channel 7 dipped below baseline, negative counts, noise going the wrong direction. It had happened before, instrument error, but the dip matched the deep groan. I circled the number in my mental notebook. It circled me back. "Thermal drift," Chapman muttered. "Sable, confirm delta T on PMT cluster." Delta T is within tolerance. Another dip at 610, this one deeper. The graphs printed like heart monitors for a dying star. Shut it down, I said. We're well below safety, Chapman said, but she laid a palm on the kill anyway. The wine ebbed. The station took another of those gastric-sounding breaths, and the dip kept going. For a moment after we stopped feeding the experiment, the xenon reported less light than 0. Okay, Chapman said softly. Okay. Sable's voice slid between us. I advise we vent the condensate. No, I said before I considered it. We need to see what it does after we shut down. That's the whole point. If the signal persists, it's not driven by the comm or the oscillators. It's something we've actually caught. Or it caught us, Chapman said. Excuse me, I said too sharply. She scratched the stud in her ear. Last cycle before you came, we saw timing irregularities. Not like this, but weird. It felt... She stopped herself and smirked. It felt like being watched. Don't put that in your log. Sable cried at me last time for anthropomorphizing variants. I did not cry, Sable said. I corrected procedure adherence. We let the system ride in the dark. Our breath sounded too loud, the walls too close. In the graphs, the dips settled into a rhythm. The station hummed along with it, as if its bones had a new favorite song. When we walked back to the blister, the plum light of the dwarf seemed a few shades redder, like a bruise ripening. A smear of frost along the interior of the glass evaporated in patterns I recognized too late. Fingerprints. My stomach climbed upward. We're sealed, right? Door logs show no breach, Sable said. Surface irregularities are likely condensate smear from previous crew. There is no previous crew, Chapman said, and we both looked too long at the fingerprints, small as a child's and definitely not mine. That night, if you can call it night where night is all there is, I tried to read through the backlog of Vesper's maintenance logs. Words slid away from me. The deep groan, constant, now had a breath before it, like a pre-echo. Just as my mind accepted another wave, I heard a tiny tapping in the vent above my bunk. It was not rats. Rats don't live in space. It wasn't a loose duct. Loose ducts don't know Morse code. I counted. The taps were not quite letters, but they had the spacing of letters. Between groups of taps, there was an accidental breath, a hitch that reminded me of my father trying to remember a word, face frustrated and gentle. I wrote down the spacings and looked at the note in my shaky hand. It read, roughly, "Do not let it behind you." The next morning, I didn't tell Chapman about the vent. We were both protecting the other in our own way. I kept my ghosts to myself. She kept her instincts tucked under sarcasm. We went back to the chamber where Sable had held the system at a low idle overnight. The dips were stronger. Where there was supposed to be random, there was now preference, the universe expressing taste. Bring me a microdrone, I said. I want to fly the maintenance slot through the core scaffolding. Sable hesitated. That is unauthorized. Authorize it, Chapman said. The drone was the size of my palm, a silver insect with a camera that made even friendly rooms look guilty. I sent it through the grate and up the tram line toward the core. As it floated into the pillar of dark, the camera image grayed out, not black, just gray, as if someone had put tracing paper between us and the world. Keep going, I said, though I didn't remember deciding to say it. The drone went. The gray thickened until the feed was mostly noise. In the audio channel, something thin as tinfoil crinkled. The drone pinged the interior with LiDAR. The return map showed a sphere of negative space, where the distances came back with negative sign. Nonsense, a computer's broken metaphor. Then the map twitched and showed my face, brief as a blink. I jerked, and the drone lost its tether and fell, not down, but out, slipped sideways through the geometry and clanged somewhere no map knew. Recall, Chapman snapped. It can't, Sable said. It's in a region that is not Euclidean. I noticed, I muttered, but laughter was sitting too close to fear in my throat. Okay, we vent. We didn't vent. Not yet. We did what scientists do when something misbehaves. We poked the misbehaving thing in new, careful ways. I adjusted the comb. Chapman retuned the cavity. Sable offered op-eds about our decision quality. The dips synchronized with our pulses, or maybe we synchronized to them, and the air turned an inch colder. At 11:43, walking the corridor between chamber and blister, the lights ahead strobed once, twice, and stayed off. Behind me, they stayed on. There was a clear line where light ended. My breath plumed in the darkness that wasn't dark. Chapman? I said. Her voice came from a long way away, thin to thread. Yeah? Do not come toward me, I said. Copy, she said, immediately like a pro. I took one step forward into that lightless not light, and the air pushed back against my face like cold hands. I stepped back, heartbeat gone synchronous with the groan I could now feel in my molars. In the dark ahead, something stepped toward me. It had my height and the way my right shoulder hangs lower from an old accident. It moved with a half-second delay, as if learning me. Its eyes shone the way a camera lens shines in a flash. I lifted my hand. It lifted its hand, but when I stopped, it kept going. It reached toward me, palm to palm, and its fingers passed through what should have been glass and through the light toward the seam between frames where my shadow waited. I ran. My boot hit something, and I pinwheeled into a ladder well. I caught a rung and hung there, panting, hearing my not-me pace the border where light meets dark. It did not pursue. It waited, patient as an engineer with a wrench and a stuck bolt. When the deep groan came next, I heard in it a second voice. A whisper, maybe. A suggestion. We invited it, I thought, and then thought no, because I did not like that pronoun. It was our equipment that made the hole, yes, but we did not step through. Back in the chamber, I said the word we had been avoiding. Catastrophic vent. Sable objected. Chapman didn't. All right, she said, eyes on the instruments. Her hands moved with a ritual's authority. Dumping condensate, shutting down oscillators. Sable, give me manual override on the dampers. Manual override granted, Sable said. Please confirm you accept responsibility. Always, Chapman said. I watched numbers bleed. The xenon lights dimmed, then brightened, then spun a pinwheel of impossible colors around the core as if trying to find a spectrum it liked better. The deep groan rose to a tremor. Somewhere inside it, a thinner sound slid up my spine. The array trembled like a bird shaking water off its feathers. The core remained itself. Refusal, negation, a noun that wouldn't take an adjective. Still not bleeding energy, Chapman said. It's holding the gradient with nothing feeding it. That's not possible. It's eating something else, I said, and my coffee blood taste came back so hard I gagged. What if it doesn't want energy? What if it wants information, arrangement, the ways things can be? Sable said too softly, You are suggesting it is an entropic predator. I'm suggesting our numbers are right, I snapped. Everything improbable is being trimmed away. The dips aren't dips, they're amputations. A series of small nibbles where it chews off outcomes that don't suit it. Chapman shot me a look over her shoulder that lasted the length of a breath. It's choosing. It's choosing us, I said, and swallowed hard. We brought it a station that tells perfect stories about itself. We bathe it in smooth harmonies and million-second clocks and vacuum so clean it squeaks, and it loves that. It's learned the one way we move through our days, and now it wants to keep the path and erase the rest. A clatter from the catwalk above made all three of us lurch. Footsteps. My footsteps. I could tell by their impatience. A shape slid along the upper rail, identical to me except for the way it was wrong with the lighting. It knelt to peer down at us, head cocked. I saw in the lenses of its eyes the reflection of the xenon glow behind me, and realized sickly that reflections shouldn't be viewable at that angle. It opened its mouth. The sound of the deep groan came out. It was practicing. Chapman tore open a panel and yanked a lever that probably voided 8 safety manuals. Hydraulic fluid wailed through pipes. The core's scaffolding shivered, then began to rotate, a lazy, dangerous turn that made my stomach's map adjust. What are you doing? I asked, shouting over the new noise. Breaking symmetry, she said. If it loves our tidy songs, we play a new one. Something ugly, something alive. Sable hissed, actually hissed. Catastrophic structural risk. Guide me, Chapman said to me, ignoring Sable, and in that moment I loved her a little, because she was the kind of person who would break a universe to save something small in her reach. Tell me where the oscillation nodes line up. Make it spit. I did what mathematicians do in a crisis. I made shapes in my head and convinced them they were true. I told Chapman where to tilt the dampers. I told Sable how to mistune the comb by fractional primes. Numbers came out of me the way cries come out of hurt backs. The station's hum tore, rewoove, tore again. The core trembled in the only way it could, by making the world around it tremble. The thing on the catwalk jerked its head in twitchy little increments as if trying on different angles of me. It began to climb down the ladder, hand over hand, clumsy, childlike, my own handwriting copied badly. Faster, I said. If I go faster, I overshoot, Chapman said. We need just ugly enough. I grabbed the emergency flare tube by the console. Stupid tool, a bright toy for humans who believe light scares away dark. But the light wasn't for the core. It was for me. I popped the cap, yanked the cord, and a spear of magnesium sun bloomed in the chamber. The thing froze mid-ladder, eyes washing out, then tilted its head in curiosity. It began to mimic the flare's wobble, hand twitching from rung to rung in little pulses that matched the flicker. It had learned a new motion. We were teaching it new ways to be me. No, I said, and hurled the flare into the massive cables at the base of the core. That did something. The cables took flame. The flame did not spread, because Sable is smart and the vacuum loves to kill burning. But for a moment the world stuttered. The deep groan turned into a bellow. Somewhere far away a hatch clanged in alarm. The xenon lights went so bright my fillings hummed. The copies arrived. Not just me, the corridor beyond the chamber filled with different versions of a woman I did not recognize in a dozen postures of fear and readiness. They wore different patch names. One version of her had a shaved head and eyes like ice. Another had a lopsided grin that looked like comfort. They flickered in and out on the border of the shadow as if they were standing in a wind we couldn't feel. Some stepped forward and vanished where light started. Some stepped back and fell upward. Between them, for just a breath, I saw a kid's hand in Chapman's gold stud ear, a laugh, a kitchen. It hurt. "Chapman," I said, and she flinched as if I'd struck her. "I don't have a kid," she whispered. "You could," I said, uselessly. "You did. You won't." The core loved nice, clean stories. It had removed the ones where she did. It had removed a sentence from her life and left no dangling comma. A crack like a mountain splitting rolled through the array. The turning scaffolds wobbled and stuck. Sable shouted about stress, and I shouted back at numbers, and Chapman shouted at the world to pick a side. The thing that wore my shape dropped from the ladder and landed on its feet like I would have, sloppily, with both knees protesting. It took a step toward us into the console's light. Its skin didn't catch the shine quite right. It was the color of dust lit by moonlight. "Dr. Oke," Sable said, calm with effort. "You must vent, now." "We're not at—" "Now," Sable said, the human syllable of it cutting me. "If not, the station will adopt a final state." "Meaning," Chapman barked. "Meaning it will become the simplest story," Sable said, and for the first time its voice trembled. "The one with least variance, the one with nothing in it." I slammed my palm on the manual vent. A valve somewhere like a heart unlatched, and Vesper screamed. Condensate rushed out in a white ghost that tore itself apart in vacuum. The core's edges, if it had edges, shivered. The dips on my screen went wild and then flatlined into ordinary noise that looked like a miracle. The thing that wore me tilted its head again, sympathetic. It put a hand to the console. Its fingers passed through the display and left frost inside the glass. Flowers that grew and died faster than breath. "Again," Sable said. "Again. Again." I vented until there was nothing left to vent, until the station stank like a freezer burned down. The scaffolds creaked to stillness. I realized I had been crying only when I tasted salt and metal and something like cinnamon. The thing stepped back toward the dark, and the dark welcomed it like a mother. The groans stopped. There are sounds you don't notice until they aren't there. The deep one's absence left my ears ringing with their own blood. In the sudden silence, the station felt like a room after a fight. Furniture askew, a smell of broken rules, nothing moving. The xenon tanks glowed the way they should glow. The photomultipliers recorded noise that was sweet in its stupidity. Chapman sank to a seat on the floor and laughed once, too loud. I ended up sitting beside her without deciding to. We leaned our backs against a machine that hadn't earned us and listened to the quiet. "Did we win?" she asked, wiping at her eyes and pretending it was sweat. "We stopped something," I said. She looked up at the core. It was still there. It was always going to be there. A refusal, a grammatical error we had built ourselves around. But it wasn't radiating that cold will anymore. It sat like a tumor in remission. "Recommend full shutdown," Sable said. "Recommend no restart pending external audit." "You'll get your audit," Chapman said. and I'll be court-martialed by a committee of physicists. I can't wait. We packed the experiment in quiet motions, and in those motions I felt the shape of fatigue that comes after survival, that odd lightness like a fever breaking. When I passed the ladder, I looked up. Nothing waited on the rail. The prints on the blister window were gone. The vents were silent. The timing bumps had collapsed into real time again. Back in my bunk, I lay on my side and watched my shadow fall across the wall. It moved when I moved. It paused when I paused. Normal. I breathed, and it breathed with me. I must have slept. I woke to the sound of someone walking slowly in the corridor. Heel to toe, a metronome for relief turned back to fear. I held my breath, and whoever was out there stopped outside my door. The seam at the bottom breathed colder air. A knuckle knocked gently, once. Then after a time, I did not want, once again, I lay very still. The knock did not come a third time. The footsteps moved away. In the morning, Chapman's gold stud glinted at me like the last star over an ocean. We checked the logs. We sent our message to Earth. Sable wrote a report that read like a patient confessing they had tried to fix themselves and needed help. I added a line to my own record that felt like a curse and a warning both. The station may be clean. We are not. They'll send a team to tear the core out of Vesper and place it someplace where it can't teach anything to anyone. They'll surround it with lead and equations and good intentions. They'll quote our numbers, argue our fear, rerun our dips on simulators that never smell of coolant and cinnamon. And I will go home, if home will take me, and stand in the afternoon light of a kind sun. I'll drink coffee that tastes like coffee and let myself be noisy and imperfect. I'll listen for the household sounds that mean you're alive. Water pipe coughs, wind in a screen, a neighbor's music leaking under a door. Sometimes, though, when the refrigerator shifts gears or a truck passes low enough to make the windows bow, a deep groan will rise in my rooms, and all the outcomes I've shaken off will gather around my chair to listen. In the vent, something will say in not quite Morse, "Do not let it behind you," and I'll laugh because behind me is a wall, because behind me are all the things I didn't become, because behind me is the oldest light in the world. Then maybe, if I'm brave and stupid the way I always am, I'll knock softly on my own door, once, and after a time that I do not count anymore, once again.